All right, so welcome everyone to another episode of AI Crossfields, where we try to answer one question: where does AI stays in a business, and where we actually don't use it? Today, I'm really excited to have David Finberg with us. He's been building Peak out in Denver, Colorado, for the past couple of years. David, thank you for coming in.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. So let's start with the backstory, how it all started. What's your background? Why SEO and why digital marketing?
That's a good question. So when I was 9 or 10 years old, I started building websites through my after school program. Actually, it was like a magnet school that I had the opportunity to attend in our local town. So started really, as a kid, just always in front of the computer, always learning. That's still the same playbook that I use today, in the sense of, innovation and being an early adopter, and, studied everything from cybersecurity, did a little bit of coding, programming, and really decided that for me and what was most fun was the intersection of people, marketing, and code. I really believe that websites and SEO and what we call AEO and GEO now really embody that. So I started Peaks Digital roughly 12 years ago with the goal of creating a better experience for people. I'm sure listeners have had agencies, some good, some bad. Really just a student of the craft, goal to create some breakthroughs for people, and we're using some AI now for certain parts of our business. We'd be happy to kind of share what the next iteration of evolution looks like. But yeah, it's really that intersection of people, process, a little bit of tech, a little bit of writing, just a little more, in my opinion, creative for me.
Amazing. Thanks for that. So, since you've already touched base on it, AEO and AGO, what are your thoughts on that? Where is it today and where is it going? What are you getting from your clients? Are you getting a lot of questions around it?
Yeah, so we've probably over the last 3 years, the playbook has changed. So good AEO and GEO is good, SEO as a foundation. So it's kind of think of it as almost like SEO plus. Though there's some proprietary things that you have to do in order to get ranked. And we can talk a little bit about, what these new LLMs are looking for. It's really changing to a statistical model, whereas Google's okay, well, to rank for best, for example, accountant near me, I need to put best accountant near me in my title and my tags and get backlinks, and it's just very literal approach. Now these LLMs know a lot more about us. So Google's goal, and I would estimate, other LLMs like Grok, ChatGPT, etc., their goal is to provide quality answers, and they know more about us than ever before. So when you're thinking about SEO versus AEO and GEO, you're really looking at more of a psychographic approach. We're best, a best query, and one people probably won't use queries as much. It's not so much a keyword as it is a question now, or a longer tail string that's a little more specific maybe to the psychographics or demographics of a user. So a best accountant for an 85-year-old woman that maybe has a farmer's market business, needs a little bit of accounting support, lower volume, versus best accountant for a 7 or 8 figure digital marketing agency are going to be two different things. And so what we're really wanting users to pay attention to are who are your psychographics, who are the types of users that you want to service, and understand that the days of people just ranking number one for best, while some of that still exists, you really have to have a broad service base in order for Google to really consider you the best for a wide majority of users. And so if you're broad, great. Let's talk about how broad of a market you serve and how your product, services, and process can help these various people at these different stages, or maybe different types of demographics or psychographics. If you're really specific with who you service, I come from the old school marketer generation of you need to probably fire 80% of your audience and really just speak to the 20% that are going to be your core supporters, and you can go broader later, but make sure that you're really speaking to that core. For us, that's B2B businesses. For a lot of people, they may have sub niches. So is it doctors, accountants, right? What are the different sub niches within that broader scope? And then what are the different types of buyers and their questions, fears, pain points? that needs to be better conveyed on your website. It also needs to be considered that like these LLMs are really looking at things through a statistical lens. So statistically, if you're that 65-year-old woman at the farmer's market, which brand or service and price point, location, specialty, accounting firm is going to be right for her will be totally different than who's right for you, me, or someone, in a larger business space. So it's a pretty cut and dry example. It gives you, an idea of like how these transformer models work. They're really looking at the statistical significance of your website being able to solve the user's query or help a user. In a day and age where these things can affect your money or your life, so they want to be very clear about which brands they're going to present. They need to be really clear about your brand and who your demographics are and who your psychographics are. Yeah, depending on the size, like if you're like a 2 to 10 or if you're like a $1 or less $1 million business, the playbook's a little different. I'd say if you're just getting started, you probably don't want to hire an agency out of the gate. You want to work on things like your web content, your reviews. If someone were to read about your brand online, what is that perception? Can you shape your branded perception is really the first place to start. And then, ultimately you're not relying on one channel. Typically in startup mode, like you're shucking and driving, you're trying to do everything that you can locally and digitally to get customers. And, that season can last 6 months, it can last 2 or 3 years. So once you've kind of crossed over into the more mature season of business, the goal is to objectively hire some help is typically the goal. Like, there's a reason we hire accountants. There's a reason that we hire HVAC. Whether you're an HVAC, a roofing company, there's a certain level of expertise that you have that no one else has. I'd say, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be involved. Doesn't mean that you should abdicate everything. You should know your numbers. You should be kind of intimately involved with your agency experience and, looking at the products and services that you want to promote. Is that kind of activity being reflective in the reporting that you're getting or the actual output that you're getting from the agency? The basics where I would probably start are your landing pages. Do you have comprehensive content? Are you going deep into your topic or are you just a high level? Google's looking for subject matter expertise. So, if you're not sure who your psychographics are, but you're just like, hey, I fix furnaces in Denver, and you want to basically target that market, who's a great fit? Who's not? Do you work in residential only? Do you work in commercial? Every topic should really be like its own page and have some subtopics or questions, FAQs, angles that help users make it through that discovery phase into the conversion phase. So primarily is like your foundation needs to be really, really solid and set. Does your site load quickly? Do you have the right pages, topics, user experience? Are you on Google Maps? How do your reviews look? Have you filled out your profile? Are you doing this in a way that you're leveraging someone with expertise in this area to help you do that? Or are you winging it, expecting a disproportionate result, from Claude and from Gemini and AI? Like, having used all of these tools heavily over the last 3 to 5 years, like they're not a replacement. And maybe at some point there will be, AIs that could replace or accentuate. I think it's more of like a done with you versus like letting an AI do all of it. I would just say that you have to really be targeted in what your approach is, and AI will oftentimes just go really broad or isn't instructed in a way that it's producing an output that is different from anyone else. So, a lot of it is going to come down to like your core brand values, your core process. Like there's not that probably much different between HVAC companies other than maybe the size of your team, the people you work with, your mission, values, right? And like your history. So doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to differentiate, but like you have to get really clear on what does make you different and really make sure that you're able to service your core customer in a way that maybe exceeds or beats out what competition is offering or what they're able to produce. So I think of it as kind of like a twofold. It's, mostly strategy, positioning and planning, building that solid foundation. And then, once your sites are set on the waypoint or the target, then run the ads. Then, go heavier on the AEO and GEO. And if it's something where maybe you've grown your business and you're at a point where you've achieved substantial revenue, where the market is going is more to these LLMs. Like there aren't going to be 10 results. There'll probably be three. A lot of the times these LLMs are just going to a search engine. So, the SEO plus model, still is the same from earlier in the call. There's some extra things and like layers on top that you're going to need to have an expert who can, execute or help you execute to get into that top three. But basically what you're going to see is a narrower lens on the market. You're also going to see a lot more niche opportunities. So you don't have to be like, a 10 to 40 million dollar company. You could be, the $300,000 to $500,000, one or two person shop that's super specialized that, maybe has, is more affordable or has more of a hands-on experience for customers. There's all types of different customers out there. So I'd say get clear on who those customers are, and more importantly, have the roadmap. And from there, before you go and you hire a company, see like what is the overarching strategy. And a lot of that is going to layer into those psychographics, demographics, who you serve. Of course, everyone just wants to rank for furnaces, right? Furnace repair or heat pump repair, but like, who are you really servicing? Is it offices? Is it residential? Are they small jobs? Are they big jobs? Like, get really clear on who you want as the customer, and then tailor everything in a way where you have like ways that you can cite data and sources that appeal to that, right? Because they're really looking at through an LLM's lens, what business am I going to cite? Well, if you're like, well, hey, in Denver, we had our hottest year ever on record this year. 50% of our customers, found that like poor and dirty filters like affected their performance this year. These might be some internal stats that you could come up with. So you want to be thinking about, how do I get cited? How do I become the authority? It's really going to be through demonstrating your expertise or having a handle on your local market or on the type of size of job, etc. Like you have to find your areas. The riches are in the niches, right? So what would be those niche areas that you serve? And if it's broad, be very specific in how broad you're going to go.
Yeah, love that. I think one thing that really resonated in that answer with me is what you mentioned about bringing an expert in place. I feel like, especially with all these LLMs and the power that comes with it, everyone feels like, oh, I've got a site, I can just copy paste that to ChatGPT or Claude and ask it, and then it will tell me what I do. Why do I need to kind of, have an SEO expert to kind of tell me what I need to do? But yeah, completely agree. I think it's a journey at the end of the day. It's not something that could happen overnight. And just like every journey, if you go into the gym on your own versus going with, personal trainer, you're gonna get some results, but do you want to get them in like 2 years, or you're gonna get that in 6 weeks? Yeah.
I love that. I think that brings up a huge point. Whether you're hiring an SEO or you're coding an app or you're looking to get that efficiency in your business, the goal for I think AI is like anyone can vibe code something. Over time, there might be less barriers to entry and software might be more commoditized. The one thing AI doesn't do is it's not really accountable to the outcome. So, it could tell you to do ABC, but if it messes up your website, is it going to put money back in your pocket and be like, oh, sorry, it didn't work? No. So, really what it comes down to is data sets and feeding the right data into the system and having the right process being fed into the system. And I think that's where, if you take a great AI implementer like yourself, or you take a great SEO firm like Peaks, and you have enhancements and it's AI integrated, it's not, full AI where you're just, hey, I'm paying a fraction of the price and AI just does it for me. You're actually having, checks, balances, and I think that's what bigger companies are seeing right now too, is like there's this anti-AI wave. A lot of people expect AI to do the heavy brunt or, grunt work or the brunt of the work. But like really what you should be doing is trying to create super employees within your business. So if you take a great coder, you take a great integrator and you give them AI, they're going to be 20 to 50, maybe more % more productive versus just vibe coding your own app. There might be security issues. Things are going to break. It's, whether you use ChatGPT, Replit, there's a million of these. Lovable. Not to say you can't play around with it. I would strongly encourage that you build proof of concepts and you iterate in these tools, and then you hire a professional that knows how to code and knows the nuances, just like, anyone could ask ChatGPT how to replace the air filter, but like, are you going to make sure that it's sealed up against the unit correctly? Like, what are the things you got to watch out for? What are the risks? You know, these LLMs over time will anticipate more of that. But I think, there's a whole market that people are missing. They're going straight for the jugular of like, AI is just going to replace jobs and I don't need people anymore. And the reality is that AI is going to create super employees and expectations are going to be higher. You're going to be able to produce higher quality faster, though it doesn't omit the need for like an expert. Like it doesn't eliminate the need to actually have people with real experience. Not, I've been trained on what usually happens, which is really what AI is. It doesn't have the experience factor. And Google considers that as well when you see like a lot of AI generated SEO content. Like 1 out of 10 SEO generated articles ranks in the top 3. So 90% of these articles aren't really going to rank, and the same applies for internal software. If you're an HVAC company and you made an AI with Replit and for some reason there's a bug in the software, it's really hard to then pull a developer in later down the line when everything's already broken. If you were to have built it with the right strategy and then used AI to help scale that strategy, you 9 times out of 10 are going to be in a much better spot. So, I think you need to be considering like, how can I use AI? How do maybe I start investing into proprietary tools that don't maybe give as much away and keep things internally, maybe increase the valuation of my company is another route. Is like in 10 years, you're going to laugh if your company isn't using AI or isn't integrated. It's like going to be using a typewriter when the laptop came out. It's like, it's cool, but it's a little bit of a novelty, and there will be a lot of businesses I think will be analog. It's like we don't use AI, and I don't think you want to be positioned as AI. Maybe you want to be AI second, not AI first. Like, can AI help you schedule a client call? Of course. Could AI review the notes that happened on a sales call and help you give some insights as to who your top sales producers are, where maybe you need some help, where maybe your company is missing sales? Certainly. And you could apply that to invoicing. You could apply that to, some of the like, let's say we had an SEO plan. AI can help you structure that plan. It can help you scale and check things. But at the end of the day, it's not going to do all the dirty work for you. And I think if you can get AI doing instead of saying like, how do I just automate this big task? What are the small parts of the task that you could automate and start there and just make everyone 20 to 30% more productive and much lower risk, than trying to automate a full system or a full process. You take one tedious subtask that no one really likes to do anyways, and you approach an AI strategist and you say, okay, well, how could we have a better onboarding? Like my team has to go create all these folders. They got to do all this. It's like, is that adding any meaningful value to my team's life? No. Does the customer necessarily impacted by it? Not really, but maybe you can have a customer on board in 5 minutes instead of a week, or have a better scheduling system that reduces the friction to allow someone to book a call without, hey, let me check my calendar. Oh yeah, let me see here. Hold on just 1 second. It's like, hey, both times are open. Here we go. Let's schedule it. Now, these are just examples, but I would encourage you to think of, the 20% of things that provide the least amount of satisfaction to your team or to customers, and basically just reclaim your time back. And the goal is over time to create like a super employee where each person is empowered with AI in their various role, though you're not looking to outsource that entire role. You're really looking at, what are some small integrations? So Claude or Gemini, Google Gemini, they can integrate with your calendar. They can help you plan your week and your schedule. They can go through call recordings and notes. And, let's say you're a manager, maybe you weren't on any of the last 10 sales calls. You ask your sales team, they're like, they went great. You don't maybe have time to record, listen to 10 hours of recording, but AI does, right? And so how are we able to then maybe go a little bit deeper and say, well, this call is a little weird. Okay, let me dive into this call and, trust but verify is the other thing. You're not just relying on it blindly. You have to really trust and verify. It can be some eyes and ears, and more importantly, it is pretty smart if you're giving it the right context and data. If you're just giving it blind, or generic. Like it's been trained on so much. It's been trained on underwater basket weaving. Is that going to be relevant for your business? No. So what we found is like when you give it a very distinct data set, the data of your company, internal, you're not sending that out over the open web. You're keeping it internal and keeping it safe and protected. That's where it could maybe say, hey, you have a couple receivables over here that from 2025 that never got collected. Like, what are the minor things that we could use it for in terms of analysis and giving it the right data sets, whether it's sales, operations, delivery, analyzing even some of the marketing, right? Hey, here's my website. What am I looking at? And then don't let it execute the whole thing unless you just want something generic, that might not rank in search. You could bring that template or that starting point and that plan to an expert who can then scale that much more safely and efficiently. I think for HVAC companies in general, you might see people wearing glasses and the glasses diagnose the HVAC. Like there's so many, AI is just going to in some ways disrupt, but like think of it as the small 80-20 rule of like, where's the 20% of places where I can use AI, and how would that transform the experience for my customers or for my internal staff, and start from a place of value versus like the ads that you see on Instagram are like, I replaced my whole team with, XYZ tool. And it's like, that's just like farming clickbait, right? Like you need to really shy away from that. Like don't be the last to dip your toe in the water either. The companies that adopted the internet in the first 15 years tended to be able to get some opportunities that maybe, Google ads in 2000 was like $1 a click. Now it's like $20 or $30 a click, right? So there might be some opportunities as a result. Whether you're looking at marketing, ops, or sales, I would use it as an indicator. And the second thing is just making sure that we have the right buy-in from team. So you can
Amazing.
install Claude and have everyone use it if they haven't been trained and they don't know where to not use it. Hey, you shouldn't use it to write up the estimate. You can use it to help you clean up the estimate. Or, what are the areas that are hard nosed and what are the areas that we want to encourage adoption? That's a very important conversation. The bigger part of that is, leading a team of 20, not everyone looks at it the same way as you do. So they might be thinking, wow, he's about to replace me with AI, right? Because that's what everyone's saying. So there's a lot of fear around it. And I think you need to say, like, we're making super employees. We don't want to replace our team with it. We want to empower our team with it. And how do we look at the things that are less risky to start and then maybe build out some roadmaps of like what we think could be possible later down the line. And almost like you need like a privacy policy for your website, you need like an AI policy for your business, almost, of like, when can you use it, when can you not? It's inherently someone will try to probably let it automate everything, and that's like pretty dangerous, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, for peaks, there's kind of like level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 4 is like you have an internal system. So we're at level 4. We've probably invested, well over 6 figures into like our own AI platform. And I see that continuing. I believe that most companies are probably like a level 1 or 2. Like level 1's like we've played around with some things. Level 2 is like we're trying to implement it or we're starting to implement. Where we started was exposure, where, okay, if we want to ideate an article with SEO, we can do that. But I'm not actually instructing my team to go and I'm like, do not use ChatGPT to generate the article. You can have it help you with the outline, right? You can have it help you with improving that article. So I think it starts with rules. And then for us, it's been a bit of both. So we're using quite a bit of Claude. Then we have like our own internal platform that is, much more robust, that we're going to, be releasing probably in the next 3 to 6 months as like a done with you service, where it's like a platform that kind of complements what we do with the team as well. So I think of it as there may be, different areas of the business that you could have AIs for. I think the important thing is to have like the roadmap and have like a priority list of like where do I start? Well, I start with the stuff that, maybe is the easier things, right? Maybe it's the email editing and you know, follow-up sequences and things that are need to be less robust. And then over time, I think every company is going to have to make this decision of like, how far of an investment am I going to make in this? And I think a lot of people want to be first. I think it's important to maybe be second or third, like Apple, right, is better. Typically, their products are more refined and they're not always the first to market, right? Samsung always has the better camera. Samsung's always first, and Samsung makes great phones too, by the way, if you're a Samsung crowd. But like, I just look at it through the lens of planning and strategy is really important. And then, I would identify, what I did is I went to every single one of my team members and I said, what do you love doing about your job? What do you not like doing? What are the tedious things that we don't enjoy doing? And how do we get those off of your plate and make you more efficient so that your time is spent on needle moving, strategic, high value work? Is posting a blog valuable? Well, it's valuable to the customer, but like the actual process of it, let's automate that. Is there, going and clicking the button and copying and texting the page? It's like, is that really like high level work where you see like quality? It's just kind of binary, like it's posted or it's not, right? So I would start with those types of tasks where they're tedious, and how do you improve the morale of your team? And you use AI in a lens of like, we're actually going to make your lives better or easier, right? Where you're not having to focus as much on the tedious, which means that you're actually getting the customers and the people are actually getting more of the time spent on the valuable activities that person can, produces on a regular basis. So, you want to start there. You can get to the big fancy platform later. I highly encourage you to think about like, what would your platform look like? What would you want it to do? Where are the areas of friction in your delivery, your sales, or your onboarding? Where's the friction in your internal team's operations? And I would probably start there, because like the team will you'll get more buy-in from your team when you're like, I want to help you enjoy your work more. I call it drainers and drivers. My mentor, Tony Grebmeyer, taught this to me. He's like, what are the three things that drive you in your role? What are the three things that drain you? Let's look at what those drainers are. And some of that is going to be your tedious work, or what I would call like, existential crisis work, like stuff that doesn't really make you feel like you made the biggest impact, right? Not to marginalize work, but you got to think of it as like, is filing the paperwork for your HR person, like, is that really important, or is it more important to be talking with the people at the company? Obviously more important to be talking with the people at the company. So apply that same practice. You're not going to automate the people that talking to people with AI, right? To like automate your HR, but what you should or could consider would be to automate the busy work that the HR person has to do every week, every time a report is filed and a thing is created. I help you file that. Can AI help you create a template that you fill out? Can AI quality check that work? Maybe over time with a custom platform or with an AI integrator, you could have it complete the report once it's trained on like what good reports look like, etc. So there's some nuance to it. Hopefully that gives people a starting point. Like, don't start with sexy, start with the non-sexy stuff. Most people want to go, they're like, how do I get rid of 3 people on my team? And you're like, it's like a pretty quick way to, it's gambling unless you have like an incredible AI developer. You're likely to probably have some problems along the way, and
Yeah.
iteration is key. And I think in 2 or 3 years you might not need your own platform, and that these tools will be more ingrained in your business. So you also have to think of, what will API costs go up or down? Some people say it's going to go up. Some people think this will become more commoditized over time. So it's hard to almost predict like where things are going. For us, we want to be evolving with the market. In a tech oriented world, you almost will need an advantage. And I think with whether you're HVAC or you're a lawyer, you have to be really careful about how you use it. And I think you as business owners, know whether you're a mature business or not, like you kind of have to understand or know internally, like, where could we be using it? Where should we maybe pump the brakes? And let's start with drainers and drivers and team morale. In my opinion, and what I've seen with other companies, both 9-10 figure huge brands all the way down to like your 6, 7, and 8 figure businesses, is usually a perception around AI, and what it really is like a lack of refinement around it. Anyone can just generate something mediocre or even above average with it, but like, what is that? Is it accurate? Is there, you know, actual strategy in it? And so it's kind of why we went in the direction of building our own tools, is to ensure that we can guarantee a certain output and certain quality, and trained on our data sets, not the data sets that these LLMs have inherently, you know, statistically they think that like these things are important for SEO. We know that, you know, you're missing ABC XYZ over here, and this strategy is really like a very narrow view of what you need to do. So same would apply, you know, in your relative industries as well. So just consider that there's no magic bullet. Start with the tedious, start with the efficiency gain, not with the replacement, and consider, you know, whether you need to build your own platform or not. There might be other solutions. Like, I think there's Ruby, it'll answer calls for you. Now, personally, I'd rather have a human answer the phone, but if you're a 1 or 2 person shop and you're out fixing a AC, or you're a 100-person shop and you don't have a nighttime receptionist, you might want to have Ruby on there. And I'm not advocating for it, I'm not an affiliate of it, you'd have to use it yourself. But just as an example of like tools that you don't have to always build your own tool. There's a lot of tools out there.
Yeah.
You got to think of privacy and data training and that kind of thing. And in the future, some of these companies may have you figuratively, excuse my French, but by the balls, right? When you input all your data into these platforms, you know, if it's a public company, do you think they're going to try to get a little bit more share value? Maybe. I think most of these companies are going to try to go for large scale adoption over like squeeze the price. You know, they're probably going to lower the price and get more people on it, but just like everything, right? Like, you know, groceries have gone up, there's electricity costs are going up. Like, I would expect over time, it wouldn't be unreasonable to see that AI costs might increase over time. And, you know, we're seeing it right now with the chip prices, and, you know, so it's evolving. It's ever evolving.
Yeah, I love that. I think you guys are doing a great job in terms of like pushing the boundaries, but also keeping the privacy in place. Really like that you've built your own kind of internal system and things like that. And also probably one of the few guests that I had here who are operators, but also talk about a roadmap and strategically where to go into it. So that's really refreshing to kind of hear.
I'm glad to add some value, and, you know, I've sampled a lot of different, you know, events, masterminds, businesses. You know, it's like you kind of see what's happening in the market, and there is a lot of hesitancy. And I really like what you said about the roadmap being like maybe the closing point here is like, you know, planning is really the first step, and getting data from your team and creating an environment where adoption isn't seen as replacement. And everywhere online they're seeing the opposite. So regardless of how virtuous or how protective we are as business owners, you have to understand that people are not as a business owner is more gung-ho about AI than maybe some of the employees, and there will be pullback. But I would just start with, you know, you really kind of need that policy and strategy, and I'd say your strategy could be comprised of, you know, the drivers and drainers of your team, you know, and from there you're in a much better position to talk to them at maybe more of an eye-to-eye level in terms of what they're seeing and what you want to create for them. Is I think people over time will assume that they will be fully replaced by AI. And I think there is at some point, you know, where AI maybe gets smarter than any human on the planet in 30, 40 years. I don't subscribe to that dystopian view. I think just like the internet, you know, there'll be an adoption curve, and we'll slow roll it as a society, and we'll find ways to get there in a more reasonable, you know, cadence, where businesses do have time to adopt, though, you know, you don't want to be last either.
Completely agree with that. Well, David, I think this has been really great. Thank you so much for your time. My final question is what I normally close with is, if you have a magic wand to fix one thing in your business or in your industry today, what would that be?
I would say the lack of best practices in snake oil, like SEO and GEO, agencies in general, whether you've done Google Ads, Meta, there are best practices that can produce meaningful results 80-90% of the time. I believe that, you know, a lot of people are using yesterday's model, or they're using gut models. They're not really using models. They're just trying different things. And you have to be an innovator in this space, though. I would say, if there was one thing that I could fix, it would be like the maybe lack of awareness. I mean, I talk to people who come from agencies all the time, and they're like, they just told me wait 6 more months or wait 12 more months, and I haven't gotten any leads yet, and I spent all this money, and it's almost like tragic. It's like I had some guy, he's like, I spent $70,000 last year on my agency and I just didn't really get anything. And I'm like, there are not that many great agencies out there. So I'd like to see more good agencies. Hopefully over time with the Peaks tool that we'll release, that can help the industry a little bit more. But I do think AI will hold more agencies accountable too, which is interesting. So yeah, just better results for customers. So there's not so much snake oil that they feel like they're being sold.
Thank you, David. Been a pleasure.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.